Hi, this is Daniel with the Learn to Share project. If you're returning, I'm as ecstatic as a recording can be. But if you're new, allow me to give you my spiel on what this project is all about. This project is equal parts research and outreach, with a singular aim of helping combat purposelessness that I see young people today facing. I say this because I am among you and want to take the opportunity to learn from and share the lessons of leaders with a little more experience and perspective than you or I. I hope you can take a valuable lesson from this conversation. Enjoy. Just to start, I'd like to give you a little overview of what this project is about and what it represents. So the goal of this project is to help others my age determine what their purpose is. I personally have experienced this, and I feel there's a big crisis of purposelessness among people my age to the point where it's almost an epidemic. And I think one of the ways that I can personally help combat that is by learning the stories of leaders and sharing them. Through this, I believe that others can watch these interviews and find some nuggets of wisdom in them and figure out how they can determine their own purpose. So not necessarily to lay out, hey, this is how you find your purpose, but it's a self-determined project where the goal is to help others determine that for themselves.
I think it's great. Congratulations
Okay.
on putting it together. I think it's very worthwhile.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna ask a few questions. The first one being, where does your story begin?
From a career perspective,
The fun part of this question is I purposely leave it a little vague. Everyone gets a different kind of determining point of where their story begins. I've heard some people's stories beginning as far back as when they were a kid. Some of them begin during their first job. It makes each interview a little more unique and a little different.
sure.
That's up to you to decide.
Okay, I'd say that my story begins with an injury, and so I had a different career path and such in mind for myself. I was an athlete. I thought I had the opportunity to walk onto the UCLA basketball team. I thought I would end up in something else, in sports, in entertainment in some way, and walked on to the UCLA basketball team. And a few weeks later, I injured my knee, and that was the end of my athletic career. And with that, I had to figure out something different, right? I was in college. I needed a job. I didn't have a lot of experience in anything other than, being a student and being an athlete. And when that was taken away from me, it one really challenged who and how I saw myself, right? If you have a big part of you that's just sort of taken away, that's something that you identified with. And I had grown up in a healthcare family, meaning my dad was a hospital CFO, my mom was a business office director, and all throughout my life, they had exposed me to all these great people in healthcare. And when I needed a job, I reached out to one of those people I knew, and I had the opportunity to become a hospital registrar, like an admissions person in the emergency room and in main admitting and in labor and delivery for a hospital that wasn't too far away from where I was going to school at UCLA. Provided some flexibility because I could work the evening shifts all through the night, or I could work the weekends. And that was my first job in healthcare. And here I am over 30 years later, still working in the business side of hospitals and health systems, and having had the opportunity now to be president or CEO of 3 different companies. And
Wow.
so it all started because I blew my knee out and I had to change direction.
It's really interesting. So that kind of segues into my next question, which is, which chapter of your story has taught you the most? So I'd love to know a little more about kind of how you came from being just a registrar to running healthcare.
Yeah. I think that I'll tell you the full story, but I think the not just the chapter, but I can even remember back to the day that really sort of changed things for me. And that was, I had managed people before, but it was always in consulting. And I had the opportunity to change jobs. And I'll go back and tell you a little bit more to kind of put this in context. But the opportunity to change jobs and be the vice president of a revenue cycle, which means that the revenue cycle in healthcare is all of the business kind of functions. So you think of it as like admitting and registration, medical records and coding, all the charge capture, and then all of the billing and collections. All of those things added together is what gets referred to as the revenue cycle. And I had the opportunity to be vice president over a revenue cycle for a health system in Los Angeles. And I'll never forget walking into that business office the first day, and there's this huge sea of cubicles. And I felt like I opened the door and 50 people turned and looked at me. And in that moment, I just had sort of this moment of shock of, why would these people ever do what I tell them to do or what I ask them to do? And what does it mean to be a leader? And what does it mean to have people follow you? And how does it mean to manage people? And I had already had a career 10 years in consulting at that point, but because everybody was sort of like me, they were A-type personalities and driven, and it was easy to manage people that were just like you. All of a sudden, I was in an environment where there was a lot of people that weren't like me. And how do you be a leader? And I'll never forget, it was that day that really caused me to study and think about management theory, and think about what it meant to be a leader, and what even is your definition of a leader, and how do you inspire people to achieve goals together, and all those sorts of things. So my career was, when I was in undergraduate, I went straight to graduate school. So in those 6 years, I worked in hospitals and I worked for small vendors, so people that were small companies that would help hospitals to collect more money or to do better billing or whatever it might be. So I did that for 6 years. When I came out of my MBA program, I had the opportunity to go into consulting. And so for 10 years, I was in consulting, working for the big consulting firms, E&Y, Capgemini, Navigant. And in those 10 years, I had the opportunity to travel all over the country and see different hospitals and health systems and how they worked, and the things that were the same and the things that were different, and how do you build relationships, and how do you, I was a 20-nothing person coming in, dealing with people that were so much older than me and had so much more experience. And why would they ever believe me in a consulting role? I mean, they knew a million times more than I did. But I just worked super hard, and I worked trust in those relationships and to get educated myself. And so I went through those 10 years. And then that's when I had this opportunity where I saw where outsourcing was really starting to take off inside of healthcare business. And I went to work for a company. My first role there was this vice president of the revenue cycle for this health system. And while I knew a whole lot about healthcare and revenue cycle at that point, I don't know that I really knew a lot about leadership and leading people. And that was kind of a pivot point in an important chapter. It changed things for me. Ultimately, I became president of that company. And we sold that company actually back to one of the consulting firms I worked for. I went on to work for another really large outsourcing company. And at one point there, I had 4,000 people across 17 offices and across the world reporting to me. And then I had 2 more opportunities to go be CEOs of companies. So I was previously CEO of company for 4 years, and we ended up exiting and selling that company. It was private equity owned. And as that was going through, I had the opportunity to become the CEO of the company that I work for today, called Knowtion Health. And it's also completely private equity owned. So I have a board of directors. I'm on the board of directors. And then I work for a private equity firm. And we have, I have employees in 39 different states right now. And I have hospital and health system clients in 41 different states.
Wow. So there's something that I thought was really interesting in what you were talking about, and that kind of got my mind going onto a question, which is, what does a leader look like to you?
The best definition that I found of a leader that resonates with me is a leader who is somebody who has people that will follow them. And that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, think about the people that you follow in your life, and what does it take to model those behaviors that people would want to follow what you do. They would want to follow you on a path or a course or towards an objective. And there's a huge distinction between having positional power and being a leader. Anybody can have a title, and everybody in their careers will work for people that are in management positions who might have a title, but you don't like how they lead, or you don't like how they manage, or if you had the choice, you might not follow them along the way. And so I've always liked this definition or idea of a leader is someone who has followers, or that can inspire people to follow them. And I know that's super broad. I'm a big believer in primarily some of the Patrick Lencioni sort of approaches, his whole book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. The reason I like it is because I believe that it applies a lot broader than just business. I think it's true of really all relationships, and that is, in order to build a team and in order to lead a team, it has to start with trust. And trust is the most important thing, at least for me in my world. Is, for example, today, me and my executive team, we've worked hard to build trust with one another. And when you have a foundation of trust, then you can move to the next level, which is you can have some difficult conversations. You can hold each other accountable. You can talk to each other when something isn't going well, and somebody doesn't leave that meeting and go have the meeting after the meeting and talk about, I can't believe we agreed to do such and such, or I can't believe so and so said such a thing. No, you leave it all in the meeting. You step up and you participate and you're active. And even if the decision of the group is to go in a different direction that you might have shown up with as your perspective when you joined that meeting, because you're a part of that team and because you've built trust, you buy into whatever that decision is and you support that decision moving forward. And ultimately, to get to the top of sort of that pyramid or that triangle that Patrick Lencioni builds, is through trust, through having hard, difficult conversations, through setting objectives and goals. Ultimately, you can achieve results and you can achieve goals. So a leader is somebody in my mind who has followers, but they have to have a structure with which they manage within. And to me, once again, that all begins with trust and being able to build that again across the team.
Now, how do you learn how to build trust among people? Because in any organization, there's going to be 100 different personalities. There's going to be people who will trust you with anything. And then there's going to be people who are total cynics. So my question to you about that is, how do you reconcile all those different people? Do you do that through kind of working with like an internal leader? Let's just say someone who's able to bring together the certain groups and kind of delegate those out, or is it a more large scale thing in building trust?
I think you can only really do it to begin with the people that you're most directly engaged with. And I do believe this can be a top-down kind of thing, because it's a cultural item that has to be defined and rolled out and understood. So this requires, in order to do that, it requires something different than what you get taught in school. In school, you get taught a lot of the hard skills. You get taught accounting, you get taught marketing, whatever, technology, whatever it might be. The soft skills, in my mind, are actually a lot more difficult often. And that's, how do you relate to people, and how do you have tough conversations, and how do you understand people? And that requires, I should say, a certain level of emotional intelligence. And where I have been most successful in this, and where I have seen leaders who I think are really good at this, is not just where they have emotional intelligence, but also where they're willing to have some vulnerability and some transparency, and to communicate very openly with their people. And I have 7 executives that report to me, all chief something, chief information officer, chief growth officer, whatever it might be, chief financial officer. And there's 7 different personalities, and each of them are wired different, to your question and to your point. And it took an investment of time and openness to build a relationship with each one of those 7, so that the 8 of us together could then build that same relationship. And that's really where it starts. And then the encouragement of, if this is working for the executive team, I encourage you to take this same approach now with your team, each one of the chiefs, right? And so they then go and they have all of their direct reports and they look to build something different. And then they encourage their team members, their management teams to build something similar down below. And you see it in employee retention, you see it in employee scores of how they like or dislike their management teams. You can literally watch it like a wave roll across an organization if you do it well. But it requires an investment of time, and it requires some empathy and emotional intelligence. And I've also, like I said, I think it when done well, it will often involve some level of vulnerability to demonstrate that you're just a human and a person. You're trying to build a relationship and trying to build trust. And if we can make this work together, we can go achieve anything. And once again, I think that's a message not just for in business. I think that's also a message for all types of relationships, marriages, and partnerships, and all types of stuff. It all has to be built on trust and be on a journey together.
And as a follow-up question to that, how do you help to foster openness in those you not only interact with professionally, but personally?
Well, some of it goes back to being vulnerable, being able to admit when you're wrong, being able to, during COVID, there was a pastor or a preacher who I thought did a really interesting speech that I watched on, I don't know, TikTok or something, but it resonated with me. And it was during COVID, but I think it was really more related to Black Lives Matters and so many of the disagreements and protests and everything else that were going on. It felt like the country was so torn apart in that point in time. And this preacher pastor was very interesting. I think he was in Los Angeles, but I've been someplace else. He asked the question, what if you're wrong? Think about the things that you believe in most deeply, and you can probably find somebody who believes the absolute opposite of what you believe. Well, what if you're wrong? What if that other person is actually right? Or what if that other person has a good perspective that maybe you're not allowing yourself to see? Maybe you're trapped in confirmation bias where all you see is evidence of the things that you believe. Well, what if you're wrong? And that's one of the ways that I think that I try and build some of those relationships and such is I'm not afraid to ask the question, what if I'm wrong about something? I very much strive for fairness across the teams, that even if I have a perspective on something, I try my best to be fair, to listen to all sides of whatever the topic might be, and for us to get to the best answer together. And, to show some vulnerability in all of that, to be able to say, I don't know that I know what the best answer is here. So let's talk about it. Let's debate it. Let's figure out for the team what the best answer is. Or to come into something and say, look, I feel very strongly about something in this direction. I know some of you don't. So let's have an open conversation about it and figure out what the right answer is, because maybe I am wrong. And
let's examine why.
Some of you will figure out maybe you're wrong, or maybe there's a whole different answer that we haven't even figured out together that we can figure out together. So I think there's a lot that goes in to try and foster that, but you got to be purposeful in it when you head into it, and not just carry a title and think that because you got a title you got all the answers.
Thank you for that. So next kind of major question is, where do you find value every day?
Ooh, I find value every day. It's funny because
one of my favorites. Everyone has such a unique answer to this one.
So I can answer this in a whole bunch of different ways. It's even interesting that you asked the question that way, because when people ask me as a CEO, what's really my role? What do I do? I'll describe it as I'm chief storyteller and chief value creator. Meaning at the end of the day, so I'll give you a business, I'll give you a personal answer to this, and maybe we'll see if they intersect.
Yeah.
I very much view it as my role in the business to create value in the business. And there's a whole lot of different ways that you can describe that, whether it's your top line revenue, your EBITDA, your, what someone's willing to pay for your company, all those sorts of things sort of drive value. Where I personally find value every day is in relationships. And that's in both personally and professionally. When I see someone in the business who is thriving and doing a great job, and we have a great relationship, and we've been able to develop that, and that person's being really successful. I like nothing more than to celebrate success and to celebrate those relationships. And I feel the same way about family and friends, that, I really find value in people and find value in the relationships that I have, and find value in investing in those relationships, and how do we make them better, and how do we make them stronger. So I would say value for me is in people and relationships.
Thank you for that. So next two questions. As a disclaimer, these two always come with a pass. So please take your time to answer them. And if you don't feel comfortable answering them, just say pass. So the first one is, professionally, I'd like to preface this by giving you what I define failure as. It's a state. It's not a negative nor a positive thing. I see it as one of nature's greatest teaching tools. So my question to you is, professionally, what is your proudest failure? And by that, I mean, what failure have you encountered that you've learned the most from, and you look back in overcoming that failure with great pride?
What comes to mind for me, I might be slightly answering a different question that I kind of have in my head, but as I almost think it as much about it as, I don't know if it's failure, but where I could have done things better, or where I learned important lessons from such, is it's really hard to make changes with people. Meaning, if you need to exit somebody from an organization, and I know there have been a few important occasions where I've tried too long to support somebody and to help make them successful, and to not move them out of an organization, and to coach them for too long, and to set goals, and to, and then reset goals and what have you, when I should have just made changes sooner than I did. And the reality is, if I would have made those changes sooner, a few things would have happened. That person I was trying to help and save was more miserable than I was. That, they were struggling just as much, and were afraid of what would be on the other side of those changes. But even more so, the team around you knows, and they see, and they understand. And in those cases where I can think where that has occurred, pretty much without exception, after finally making the hard decision and making the change with somebody, I've had one or multiple people come up to me and basically say, "What took you so long?" Like, we could all see it. We all knew. We appreciate
the axiom of hire well, fire well. I've heard that's one of the golden rules.
100%. Yeah. And or hire slow and fire fast is the other way that sometimes is. I don't agree with that, but it's another way that that's said sometimes. But I think it's some of those people decisions that I could have made sooner that would have been better for everybody, is at least what comes to mind initially to answer that question.
Okay. And my kind of last major question for the interview. Please take your time to answer this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is this is my favorite question. And it's, how do you want your story to end? By that, I mean, what do you want to leave behind when you're gone? And how would you like to be remembered?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. Strangely enough, it's a conversation I was having yesterday, and although probably a much broader conversation. And so I'll sum it up this way. If you're laying on the bed and you're about to pass away, or you know that life is ending, no one ever looks back and says, "I wish I spent more time at work," or "I wish I had earned an extra dollar," or, "I wish I had one more award that had my name on it." You reflect back on, "I wish I would have had a deeper relationship. I wish I would have led life the way that I led life versus, or I wanted to lead life versus how I led it for other people's perspective. There is a handful of statements that people make at the end of life that has held true forever, probably.
Will
And
continue to do so.
What's up?
And would probably continue to do so.
Absolutely. So I can say in my life, I've been very career driven. I've been very achievement driven. And for a long time, I would have answered this question about a legacy and a career, and a legacy of, did I have my name on a plaque or a building or a business or some other thing? And that's changed for me. Now I think it's much more, I would love for my legacy to be much more around having had a successful family, having had successful friendships and relationships, doing my best to not, on my deathbed, have any of those things that I would say that are so commonly said, because people spent their lives either focused only on career, or they focused on, things that at the end they wish they would have spent their time doing other things with people, or having a deeper love, having a deeper marriage, having better relationships with your kids, having spent more time with your friends and loved ones. I think I'd rather have my legacy now be, he was a good husband, he was a good friend, he was a good partner in all of this. I think that's going to be what would be much more important in life, versus he was so successful he got his name on a building. I think at the end, a lot of that stuff doesn't really matter. And I don't think you really care about it at the end. So I'm trying to make changes now in this second half of life that allows me to be a better version of myself than maybe I was leading up to this point.
Thank you.